Before he became one of the most powerful rulers in ancient China, he was a homeless prince. He had no throne, no army, no kingdom under his control, and no guarantee that he would even survive. For 19 years, he wandered from state to state, depending on the mercy of other rulers. Some welcomed him, some used him, some humiliated him, some wanted him dead. He was mocked, ignored, tested, and merely forgotten by history. But he kept moving, and when he finally returned home, he did not return as the broken man his enemies expected. He returned as Duke Wen of Jin, one of the greatest hegemons of the spring and autumn period. His birth name was Chang'er, and his story is one of the most dramatic comeback stories in ancient Chinese history. If King Gojong of Yue represents revenge through humiliation, Chang'er represents power through exile. His life asks a different question. What happens when a man loses his country before he ever gets to rule it, spends almost 2 decades wandering through danger, and then comes back with enough experience to reshape the balance of power? To understand Chang'er, we have to enter the world of the spring and autumn period, more than 2,500 years ago. China was not yet unified under one emperor. The Zhou king still existed, but his authority had weakened. Real power belonged to regional states, and those states competed constantly through war, marriage, diplomacy, betrayal, and alliances. Among them, the state of Jin was one of the most important. Jin was large, strategically located, and powerful enough to compete with the strongest states of the age. But like many great states, its greatest danger did not always come from outside. It came from inside the ruling family. Chang'er was a son of Duke Xian of Jin. He was not the only son, and that mattered. In royal families, blood did not simply mean love or inheritance. Blood could become a weapon. Every son was a possible heir. Every mother had ambitions. Every court faction had a preferred candidate. The palace was not just a home. It was a battlefield with silk curtains. The crisis began with Li Ji, a favored consort of Duke Xian. She wanted her own son to inherit the throne, and that meant the older sons of Duke Xian had to be removed. Through court intrigue, suspicion, and manipulation, the succession of Jin became poisoned. One prince, Shensheng, was pushed into tragedy and died by suicide after being falsely accused. Another prince, Yiwu, struggled for survival. Chang'er also became a target. When a palace turns against you, innocence is not enough. Explanation is not enough. Sometimes the only way to live is to leave. So Chang'er fled. That flight began one of the most famous exiles in Chinese history. A small group of loyal followers stayed with him, including men who would later become important statesmen and generals. They were not following a king. They were following a displaced prince with no clear future. That loyalty mattered. In politics, people often surround power after it is already visible. But the people who stay when power disappears reveal something different. Chang'er's followers believed that the man in exile might one day matter again. Or perhaps they simply believed that loyalty itself mattered, even when success was uncertain. At first, exile may have looked temporary. A prince flees danger, waits for the situation to change, then returns. But Chang'er's exile did not end quickly. It stretched on year after year. He moved through different states, depending on foreign rulers who measured him not as a person, but as a political asset. To some, he was a useful guest. To others, he was a burden. To others, he was a future card to play against Jin. This is one of the hardest parts of exile. You are never completely free. You may not be in prison, but you are always in someone else's hands. Every meal reminds you that you depend on another ruler. Every polite welcome hides calculation. Every insult tests whether you can swallow anger without losing yourself. Chang'er traveled among the Di people, then to Qi, Cao, Song, Zheng, Chu, Qin, and other places in different traditions of the story. Along the way, he saw the political world from below. That experience separated him from princes who grew up protected inside palaces. A sheltered prince learns ceremony. An exiled prince learns reality. Chang'e saw which states were strong and which only loved strong. He saw which rulers had vision and which had vanity. He saw how ministers influenced decisions, how hospitality could be sincere or strategic, and how a single insult could reveal the weakness of an entire court. One of the most famous episodes happened in the state of Cao. The ruler of Cao treated Chang'e with disrespect. In some versions, he was curious about Chang'e's unusual physical appearance and behaved in a humiliating way, treating him less like a noble guest and more like an object of amusement. For a proud man, this kind of humiliation burns deeply. Chang'e could not punish Cao at the time. He had no army, he had no throne. He could only remember. This is where his story begins to resemble Gujian's in spirit, not because the details are the same, but because both men learned the discipline of delayed response. The powerless cannot always answer insult immediately. Sometimes survival requires silence. But silence does not mean forgetting. In another state, Zheng, he was not properly welcomed. In Song, he received better treatment. In Qi, his life became comfortable enough that comfort itself became dangerous. She treated him well, and he even married there. For a man exhausted by wandering, comfort can feel like salvation. But comfort can also become a trap. If Chang'e settled into a pleasant life in exile, he might never return to Jin. He might become a respected guest, a foreign husband, a man with memories of lost power but no future. Some of his followers understood this danger. They knew that exile was not supposed to become home. They had followed him through hardship because they believed he still had a destiny. If he forgot that destiny, then all those years of suffering would become meaningless. According to tradition, his wife and Qi and his followers helped push him to leave even when he resisted. This moment is important because it shows a weakness in Chang'e that makes him human. He was not always the unstoppable hero. After years of instability, he was tempted by peace. Many people would be. When life has hurt you long enough, comfort can feel more attractive than ambition. But history often turns on whether a person can leave comfort before comfort quietly buries their purpose. Chang'e left Qi and continued his long road. The most important stop may have been Chu. Chu was a major power, culturally distinct and militarily strong. King Cheng of Chu treated Chang'e with respect. During their meeting, the king reportedly asked Chang'e how he would repay Chu if he ever returned to power in Jin. Chang'e answered with a famous promise. If Jin and Chu met in battle, he would retreat 3 she, roughly 90 li, as repayment for Chu's hospitality. On the surface, this sounded humble, but it also revealed something about Chang'e's political mind. He understood debt, he understood face, he understood that words spoken in exile could shape future diplomacy. Years later, this promise would matter on the battlefield. Eventually, Chang'e reached Qin. Qin was rising in the west, and Duke Mu of Qin saw value in him. By this time, Jin itself was unstable. Duke Shen had died, Yiwu had taken power as Duke Hui, and after him came Duke Huai. Jin's internal politics remained tense. For Qin, supporting Chang'e was not just charity, it was strategy. A ruler placed on the throne with Qin's help might become an ally, or at least reshape the political balance. For Chang'e, Qin's support was the opening he had waited for. After 19 years of exile, the door to Jin finally opened. With Qin backing and support from Jin nobles, Chang'e returned to his home state in 636 BCE. Imagine what that return meant. He was no longer the young prince fleeing danger. He was older, hardened, experienced, and politically educated by nearly 2 decades of humiliation and observation. He had seen the inside of foreign courts. He had learned the price of arrogance and the value of loyal followers. He had been dependent long enough to understand power from the viewpoint of the powerless. When he became ruler of Jin, he became known as Duke Wen of Jin. But taking the throne was not the end of the story. In many ways, it was the beginning of the real test. A man in exile can dream about ruling, but once he rules, dreams become administrative problems. He had to stabilize Jin, reward supporters, manage noble families, rebuild authority, and prove that he was not merely a returning survivor, but a capable ruler. Duke Wen moved quickly and intelligently. He relied on experienced followers who had shared his exile. These men were not decorative courtiers. They were people tested by hardship. They had seen him weak, tired, angry, tempted, and humiliated. That kind of relationship can create trust, but it can also create political danger if not handled well. In Duke Wen's case, his early rule benefited from these loyal men because they helped him transform experience into policy. He reformed governance, strengthened military organization, and restored Jin's position among the major states. His years abroad had taught him that a ruler must understand more than his own capital. He had to understand the entire interstate system. He knew the ambitions of Qi, Chu, Qin, Song, Zheng, and other states, not from reports alone, but from lived experience. This gave him a rare advantage. He had personally observed the personalities and weaknesses of other rulers. He knew who respected strength, who could be persuaded, who remembered favors, and who underestimated him. Soon, Duke Wen faced the great test of his reign, the struggle against Chu. Chu was powerful, and its influence was expanding northward. If Jin wanted to become a leading power, it had to confront Chu. But this was not a simple war of revenge. It was a contest for leadership in the Chinese world. The Zhou king's authority was weak, and the title of hegemon did not mean emperor, but it meant something close to leadership among the states. A hegemon protected the Zhou order, led alliances, punished disorder, and commanded prestige. Duke Wen wanted Jin to stand at the center of that system. The confrontation came at the Battle of Chengpu in 632 BCE. Before the battle, Duke Wen remembered his old promise to King Cheng of Chu. He had said that if Jin and Chu met in battle, he would retreat 3 she. So he did. Jin forces withdrew, fulfilling the promise and preserving moral legitimacy. But this retreat was not weakness, it was strategy. By pulling back, Duke Wen honored his word, avoided looking ungrateful, and created tactical conditions that helped Jin. Then Jin fought. The Battle of Chengpu became one of the defining battles of the spring and autumn period. Jin defeated Chu and checked its northern expansion. This victory made Duke Wen one of the dominant figures of his age. The exiled prince had become a hegemon. The man once dependent on the hospitality of others now hosted alliances and commanded respect from states that once judged him as a wandering refugee. The contrast is powerful, but the deeper lesson is not simply that he waited and won. The real lesson is that exile educated him. Chang'e did not spend 19 years merely suffering. He gathered information, he developed judgment, he learned patience, restraint, diplomacy, and the emotional discipline needed to survive when he had no power. When power finally came, he had a broader view than many rulers born directly into comfort. That is why his story is so valuable for a modern audience. Many comeback stories focus only on revenge. Chang'e's story is different. His exile was not only about proving enemies wrong, it was about becoming qualified for the power he later received. There is a difference between wanting a throne and being ready for one. Before exile, Chang'e was a prince with bloodline. After exile, he was a ruler with experience. The 19 years mattered because they turned inheritance into leadership. At the same time, his story is not clean or soft. The world he lived in was brutal. Succession politics destroyed families. Rulers used guests as strategic tools. States welcomed exiles when useful and abandoned them when inconvenient. Loyalty could save a man, but ambition could kill him. Duke Wen's rise was inspiring, but it came from a violent political environment where survival required calculation. That complexity makes the story stronger. It is not about a good man simply receiving a happy ending. It is about a man shaped by hardship who learned how power actually works. One of the most overlooked parts of Chonler's journey is the role of his followers. His companions had to decide, again and again, whether to continue following a man with no certain future. Their loyalty was not rewarded immediately. For years, they endured danger and uncertainty. Some gave advice he did not want to hear. Some pushed him away from comfort. Some helped him preserve ambition when he was tired of wandering. This matters because great comebacks are rarely individual events. They are networks of trust stretched across time. A leader may become the face of the story, but behind him are people who kept the possibility alive when the outcome was still invisible. The story of Jade Zitui, one of the figures connected to Chonger's exile, became especially famous in later tradition. According to legend, during the hardship of exile, he showed extreme loyalty, even sacrificing for Chonger when food was scarce. Later, after Chonger became Duke Wen, Jade Zitui did not seek reward and withdrew. The later legends around him became connected to remembrance and the Cold Food Festival. Historians may debate details, but the emotional meaning is clear. Political success often forgets quiet loyalty. A ruler may remember the grand strategists and battlefield commanders, but the people who suffered silently can disappear from the official celebration. This gives Duke Wen's story a bittersweet edge. Yes, he returned. Yes, he became powerful. Yes, he changed history. But his rise also raises a question that appears again and again in ancient history. After victory, how does power remember those who helped it survive? Compared with Gujian, Duke Wen feels less consumed by revenge and more shaped by exile. Gujian's central image is a king tasting bitterness so he will not forget humiliation. Duke Wen's central image is a prince walking from court to court, learning the world one insult and one favor at a time. Gujian rebuilt a broken state from within. Duke Wen returned from outside and transformed his state after years of wandering. Gujian's story is about delayed revenge. Duke Wen's story is about delayed legitimacy. Both men teach patience, but their patience has different flavors. Gujian's patience burns. Duke Wen's patience travels. The modern lessons are clear. First, losing position does not always mean losing future. Chonger lost access to power, but he did not lose the ability to learn. In fact, losing power forced him to learn things he might never have seen from a palace. Second, comfort can be more dangerous than hardship. Hardship tells you that something is wrong. Comfort can convince you that your unfinished mission no longer matters. Chonger almost settled into ease and Qi. If he had stayed, history would remember him as a wandering prince, not Duke Wen of Jin. Third, humiliation can become education if you refuse to waste it. Every ruler who insulted or underestimated Chonger taught him something about character, politics, and statecraft. He did not answer every insult immediately. He stored the lessons until he had the power to act. Fourth, leadership is not only about personal ambition. It is about timing, alliances, credibility, and the ability to turn suffering into judgment. By the time Duke Wen fought Chu, he was not relying on courage alone. He used reputation, moral positioning, strategic retreat, and military strength together. That is mature power. Fifth, the people who follow you when you have nothing may be more important than the people who celebrate you when you win. Chonger's exile proved the value of loyal advisors, and his success depended on the people who stayed during the years when staying looked irrational. In the end, Duke Wen of Jin became one of the great hegemons of the spring and autumn period. He restored Jin's strength, defeated Chu at Chengku, supported the Zhou royal order, and stood as one of the most respected rulers of his generation. But the most powerful part of his story is not the moment he became hegemon, it is the long road before that. 19 years is a lifetime in politics. Most people disappear after 19 years away from power. Their networks collapse, their names fade, their supporters move on, their enemies relax. But Chang'e endured long enough for history to change around him. When the opening came, he was ready. That is why his story still works today. It is not just ancient Chinese history. It is a story about what exile can do to a person. It can break him, or it can sharpen him. It can make him bitter, or it can make him observant. It can turn him into a man who only dreams about what he lost, or it can turn him into someone capable of handling what he later gains. Chang'e's 19 years of wandering did not delay his greatness. They created it. The prince who left Jin was a survivor. The man who returned was a statesman. And that is the real reason Duke Wen of Jin became unforgettable. He did not simply come back. He came back different.